Hi everyone, welcome back to A Little More Inspired. My name is Blanca. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe and follow below so that you get a notification every time that I release a new episode. Also, please check out alittle.moreinspired.com to explore all of my content and all of my blog posts. While you're there, don't forget you can submit your email to receive email notifications of all of my recent posts. In today's episode, I'm incredibly excited to dive into my most recent hyperfixation. I recently discovered a saint whose teachings and writings have deeply moved me. Her name is Saint Teresa of Avila. She was a 16th century Spanish saint, a Catholic Carmelite nun, and a mystic. She's recognized as a doctor of the church. She is one of the most influential figures in Christian spirituality, and she's known for her deep insights into prayer, contemplation, and the interior life. In this episode, we'll explore who she was and why I believe she's a timeless and extraordinary spiritual figure, and one of her most profound works, The Interior Castle. This book serves as a spiritual roadmap, illustrating the soul's journey through the 7 mansions, each representing a deeper stage of spiritual awareness and union with God. I'm especially excited about this topic because St. Teresa's personality really resonates with me, and in so many ways, I really do feel like I see myself through her while I was reading about her and learning about her journey and the inner turmoil that she really struggled with, especially during her youth, is something that I really, really resonated with. And a lot of her insecurities, I feel like, really resonated with my personal insecurities. And I felt like she really gave me a lot of personal clarity recently. And she helped me move through some really big soul lessons that I had felt stuck in for a while. She had a rebellious and curious nature, and she had this struggle between engaging with the world and dedicating herself to God, and her deep longing for something beyond this earthly life are things that I think many of us can relate to. So yeah, that's what we'll be diving into today. So let's dive into who was Saint Teresa of Avila. Her full name is Teresa Sanchez de Cepeda, and she was born in 1515 in Gotarrendura, Spain. She is the patron saint of Spain, headaches, people in religious orders, sick people, and writers. And that's another reason why I wanted to learn about Saint Teresa, was because I love to write, and I really wanted to learn more about her when I saw that she was the patron saint of writers. And I also feel like with Saint Teresa, you don't have to be Christian Catholic to learn about who she was and her teachings and her books. I actually didn't discover her through a Christian outlet. I discovered her through a Buddhist teacher. She's just this lady that I follow on YouTube, and she said that when she was learning about her spiritual awakening, she discovered Saint Teresa's autobiography and her works of The Interior Castle, and how it deeply moved her, and it really influenced her spiritual life. And she just had such beautiful things to say about her, because Saint Teresa really does a great job at describing in depth the spiritual awakening and the levels of consciousness that the soul can get to while on earth, when it is totally immersed and dedicated to its spiritual path. So a little bit about Saint Teresa. What I love about her is that she wasn't an obvious saint. In her writings, she often self-deprecates a lot, but I think a part of that was a reflection of her deep humility. And a part of it was a survival mechanism, I believe, because she was a woman in the 16th century, and at the time when, being a woman and having strong opinions and mystical experiences, or even a deep interior life, could easily get you labeled as hysterical, or worse, like dangerous. It wasn't really a safe time for women to be displaying these mystical experiences, because she was born during the Spanish Inquisition. So at that time, Spain was really adamant about everybody converting into Catholicism, but also they really didn't want anything that resembled anything Protestant at the time, because Protestants really, their belief is that you have a just direct line to God, which is very much true, but the way that Catholics practice their faith is very different. And so St. Teresa's Interior Castle is a work about literally finding that direct connection between God and yourself through your isolation. So women with her level of intellect and spiritual depth weren't exactly celebrated, and yet she managed to navigate this world with wisdom and courage. I will say that she downplays her intelligence a lot in her books and in her writing. That's something that you kind of have to swim through while you're reading her work. But I also believe that she had a profound understanding that nothing she did was purely from her own human effort, and everything was God working through her. I also think that I'm not sure, I might be assuming, but I kind of feel like maybe she speaks in such a self-deprecating kind of way because she was a woman, and women weren't really allowed to write books and express themselves in this very intellectual way. So I don't know if she does it as a way to disarm people, but it is it is kind of frustrating at times when you're reading her work about like how much she self-deprecates throughout her writing. Like you'll read a sentence that's really profound, and then she'll be like, but I'm garbage. And then she'll say another really, deep, insightful thing, and then she'll be like, I'm trash. And you're just like, girl, like just write your book and but like, again, like I said, she was from the 16th century. I also believe that she had a profound understanding that nothing that she did was purely from her own human effort, and everything was God working through her. And this really reminds me of the concepts of charisms in the Catholic faith. I actually took a charisms workshop recently. I found it to be very fascinating because it's very different from talents. When a person undergoes a spiritual awakening, God can bestow certain gifts upon them, gifts they may have never had before. These gifts are called charisms and are meant to be used in service of others. There are about 21 officially recognized charisms, and like I said before, I actually took a workshop on this, and I found it to be very fascinating to learn about the distinction between charisms and natural talents. A talent is something you're born with and you inherit through your family lineage or naturally embedded in your personality. For example, like if you come from a family of musicians, then that's a talent that you've inherited from your bloodline, right? Not always, but there are certain talents that just come from you just in nature. You were born with them. And talents can be used however you want. They can be used for self-serving purposes or for the benefit of others. They don't leave you. You can use them however you like. But charisms are different. They aren't something you own or control. They're gifts given to an evolving spirit that is seeking to serve. You can't hoard or misuse them for selfish desires, because if you do, God will take them away. Charisms are always meant to be in alignment with divine purpose. For example, one of the charisms in the 21 official list is administration. A person with this gift might find themselves naturally skilled at organizing and leading efforts that serve the greater good. You might work for a church, or you might work for an organization that requires that kind of talent, and you've been given that gift. From the workshop that I took, they say that on average, individuals with an awakened spirit usually get around one or two charisms. You don't get like the whole list. You rarely get two, but you usually get one that you can use to be of service to others. Another charism is knowledge, where someone is gifted with the ability to absorb and retain and explain complex ideas in ways that others can understand. There's also encouragement, writing, generosity, and many more. I believe something like this happened to me because before my spiritual awakening, I didn't really enjoy reading or absorbing knowledge the way that I do now. But suddenly it was like a switch flipped. It was like a feeling that I couldn't satiate. I felt this hunger for more and more information. the charism of knowledge isn't just about learning for yourself, but about sharing it in a way that benefits others. Another charism that I find really fascinating is the charism of generosity. One of the women that they gave an example of in my workshop of generosity was this woman who already was wealthy, and she had this thing for winning the lottery. And every time she would win the lottery, she would donate the money to a nonprofit, or an organization that would help the people. And they say that one of the reasons God had given her that charism was because he knew that she wouldn't hoard the money that he would give her. And so that in their heart, that person won't try to hoard it. It also reminds me of that one lady who inherited like $1 billion or something from her deceased husband. And then she paid off the tuition of all of those students in medical school in that one university in Queens. I when I saw that story, I had just taken my charism workshop, and I was like, that lady must have the charism of generosity, because she used the inheritance that she received for the greater good. And that's the thing about charisms as well, is that with charisms, you can't use them for bad. So because they're activated during your spiritual awakening, you will find that they are nurtured through the goodness that you do through being of service of others. And you really have to keep your ego in check if you get certain charisms that bring you success, because if at any point, spirit or God feels like you're misusing the gift that he's given you to self-serve, or to be to do any evil to others, they will literally take it away from you. And I actually do have a story of an individual that I know that has charism of healing. He had been married to a family member of mine, and he used to struggle with a lot of like back pain, and he really was afraid of getting into, like the prescription world here in the US, because he was just like afraid of, becoming addicted to those. But the pain that he was having in his back was like so excruciating. He was like, I need to find help. While exploring on the internet, he found like this healing place somewhere in freaking Peru. And he was like, told my family member, like, I'm going to go to this place because they say that they can help me with my back pain. And the guy there literally heals him. He was like a healer. He was also like what's it called? Like a chiropractor. Shaman that was there was like, I can teach you this, like, and you can take it to wherever you live, because I'm sure there's a lot of people where you are that you could help with this gift. And the guy that was married to my family member, hey, I'll do this. And when he came back to the US and he finished his workshops and had been going there for a year, my family member who was married to him had been so supportive for him throughout this process, and was like so happy for him. And his massages ended up being so successful here in the city that they lived, that he ended up like getting so many clients that he had to open up a clinic. And then because that clinic was getting so popular, this was like in the span of 5 years, he had like opened a clinic here in the US and like a couple clinics in El Salvador. At the time he had been living really well with my family member. They had completed all like the sacraments. They were married. They had a beautiful family, gaining a lot of like, material wealth. And he got so popular with the massages and the chiropractor thing that he had learned, that he ended up getting on like primetime TV in El Salvador. And that's where like the downfall happened, because all of the popularity that he had received from this like spiritual gift that had been given to him, the gift of healing, and it started getting to his head. A family member would tell him, oh, you have to thank God, because you wouldn't be healed, but you also wouldn't have received this gift from the shaman who believed in you. And he started getting really egocentric and was like, oh no, this is my gift. He didn't have like the wisdom to maintain the gift. You know what I mean? And because it got to his head and he no longer was being grateful, he ended up getting tempted and ended up like cheating on my family member and having a child out of wedlock, and everything crashed and burned for him. That's the difference between a talent and a charism, is that you can't use it for bad. You have to always use it for good. And if the divine feels like you're becoming too egocentric or you don't have the wisdom to maintain humility throughout the success that you're gaining, then they'll take it away. So one of the ways that you will know that you've gained a charism is that people will start to point it out to you. It's not something that you can just be like, oh, I have this charism now. Something that just starts to like pop up. And then as you are growing in your spiritual practice, people will start saying like, oh, you're really good at that. Or I've had lots of people tell me like, oh, you're really good at explaining that. Or, oh, that the way that you talked about that topic was really helpful. It's like something that you start to hear, and like, it's like that whisper that God starts to tell you, like, this is a way to get into alignment with being in service of others and also working in the purpose of like serving a higher good. In my workshops, she did say that you can ask God specific charism that you want. God can gift it to you if he feels like you will genuinely use it for the greater good of others. Again, like, it's very rare to get more than one. Some people might get two, but usually it's one that is very specific for you. And like for me, I genuinely do believe that I've been given the charism of knowledge because I didn't like to learn before I had my spiritual awakening. And now I have this insatiable thirst for it, but I also feel like I need to share it. Like I feel that in my soul. And so when I create, I don't create from a place of like, I want to just be seen, or I want to get all these followers. Like, I create, and then like if it's helpful to others, like that's my number one priority. And I create because I have the feeling of it'll help other people, and then maybe one day I could find alignment and success with what it is that I'm doing, but that isn't necessarily my goal right now. And also, like I said of that story, like I really am going to have to keep my ego in check because God will help you rise, but there has to be a sense of humility that you keep while you're rising, as this understanding that this isn't really my gift that I was born with or something that I'm entitled to. But if I stay in alignment with what God wants from me, then this gift can keep being nurtured within me. And so I just wanted to dive a little deeper into how you will know you have a charism, especially if this is your first time learning about them. When I first discovered the concept of charisms, I was fascinated. I had never heard of them before. What amazed me the most was how different they are from talents. Unlike talents, which are natural abilities we're born with or develop over time, charisms are received during a spiritual awakening. They aren't something you inherit or practice into existence. They are activated as you align with your divine purpose. Another key thing that stood out to me is that charisms must be nurtured, not in the way that talents are, but through your spiritual progress. They grow as you deepen your interior life and connection with the divine. If you do not cultivate your relationship with God, these gifts may never appear or may fade over time. Charisms are not meant for personal gain, but you can gain things through them, because a lot of the times your charisms can align with what you do for work or how you create abundance for yourself. God will sometimes even enhance your natural talents as a way to be of service to others. And because they are supernatural in nature, you will often recognize them because they come with an ease, an effectiveness, and an impact that goes beyond your own abilities. If this is the first time you are hearing about charisms, I encourage you to reflect on your spiritual journey and see if you recognize any of these gifts emerging in your life. Often others will notice them in you before you even recognize them in yourself. So here are some ways you will know that you have a charism. Number one is it feels natural yet beyond your own ability. Charism may feel effortless when you use it, even if you don't have formal training or prior experience. It's almost like a blooming flower at the beginning. And number 2 is it bears spiritual fruit. The clearest sign of a charism is the effect it has on others. So your gift will actively affect the people around you, or whoever it is that you're being of service to. You will see that it helps them in some kind of way. You experience joy and energy when using it. Charisms are life-giving, not exhausting. When you use a charism, you feel energized rather than drained. I can relate to this because whenever it is that I'm creating from a place of knowledge or from whatever it is that I'm learning, I feel like I have never-ending energy for it. Like I truly enjoy it so much, and that's something that I never experienced before. Even if I'm not making any monetary abundance from it, I like to do it and it feels right to do it. It works in unexpected situations. You may unexpectedly speak, act, or serve in a way that impacts someone deeply without knowing why. And number 5, others recognize it before you do. They may say things like, "You have a gift for this," or "I always feel inspired when you do that." And number 6 is you see consistent patterns. A one-time moment of inspiration isn't necessarily a charism, but if a certain pattern keeps occurring, it's a sign. And lastly, it aligns with God's purpose and not self-gain. Again, you can gain from your charism as it can usually align with something that you do for work, but it's the intention behind your actions that matter. Charisms are always for the service of others, not for personal benefit. If it starts being used selfishly or for personal status, the charism may start to fade. If you are wondering whether you've received a charism, here's what you can do. Number 1 is pray for clarity. Ask God to reveal the gifts He has given you. Number 2, reflect on past experiences. Look for moments when you felt unusually effective, inspired, or joyful while serving others. Number 3, pay attention to feedback. Have others pointed out something about you that you didn't recognize in yourself? Number 4, test it in service. Try using the gift intentionally and see if it bears fruit on others. And lastly, look for confirmation. True charisms become more evident over time through repeated experience and recognition from others. Discovering your charism isn't about self-promotion. It's about recognizing how God is working through you for the good of others. If you're walking in alignment with your purpose, your charism will naturally reveal itself through joy, spiritual fruit, and the confirmation of those around you. So yeah, that's how you'll know. I believe that I think Saint Teresa has the same understanding with her writing, and her mystical insights weren't just personal talents, but divine gifts given to her to help guide others towards God. She recognizes that her words, her poetry, and her ability to articulate the soul's journey weren't just hers. They were tools she was entrusted to assist in teaching others about the interior life. As a woman born into a wealthy family, some say St. Teresa was born in a golden crib, and she was her father's favorite child out of 9 siblings, and she was charismatic and inquisitive and full of curiosity, and she had a natural love for reading and exploring the world. St. Teresa, why I really like her was because she wasn't the typical feminine figure of her time. She had an insatiable hunger for intellectual stimulation. She had politically daring ideas and a bold vision of the world. In many ways, she started off as a feminist in her own right and challenging the limitations placed on women in the 16th century. And she wanted to want God, but at the same time, she had a deep desire for the approval and admiration of others. And I really love how honest she is about that desire, and how it was like this cross for her, because she lived with this inner turmoil of not wanting to let go of her popularity and of the way that people loved her, but then also seeking, this detached life that was deeply immersed in her spiritual calling. She was endowed with natural beauty, charm, intelligence, and humor. Teresa naturally became the center of attention wherever she went, whether it was among her family, entertaining visitors in the convent, or even persuading powerful men to agree with her point of view. She had a gift of captivating people, and throughout her book, she says that people would just be like in awe in the way that she spoke about things that she felt passionate about. And she also says that a lot of the men that she interacted with like would fall in love with her because like they just loved how passionately she spoke about the things that she was really interested in. And the thing that I really like about Saint Teresa is that she really is just so honest. I've been reading her autobiography, and she's just like so real. Like she didn't start off wanting to be a nun. I think that but she didn't want to get married either. I mean, from my understanding, I don't think that she initially entered the convent out of her own desire, because I think that if it would have been up to her, I think originally she would have been like a free woman, but because of the times of it being the 16th century and it being in such a religious country, women didn't really have the option of being free, you know? It was either you were married or you went into the convent because you weren't allowed to just be a single woman without children. Like that was your only two options. And so her reputation was really important to her and her family because they were people of status and they were very wealthy. And so her father started to disapprove of like the way that she was kind of growing into this very feminist like figure. And so he's actually the first one that tells her that she has to go to the convent for the continuation of her education throughout her teenage years. And also when Saint Teresa's mother passed away, she was only 13 years old, and she really loved her mom, and she talks about how her mom was this really sweet and kind, nurturing woman. And so she really grieved her when her mom passed away. She was really young. She was only 33. It was through childbirth. She had 9 kids. And so that created this really big fear in St. Teresa where she didn't really want to be a wife because she also had never really met a man that really intellectually stimulated her. Throughout her book, she talks about how she loved men who knew a lot, but she'd never met a man who knew a lot. She only knew men who knew a little. And so I think that for her, she never really met a man that would have made her want to be married. And she also had a big fear of birthing a child because her mother passed away at such a young age. And so I think that the only option for her was like, okay, well, I'm going to go into the convent. So Teresa was sent to an Augustine convent for a short time for her education. This was a common practice for young women from noble families. However, she didn't initially intend to stay there permanently. And she wrestled a lot with choosing between religious life and drawn to the everyday world. Eventually, she chose to become a nun, but her father was strongly against it. She was like a woman of integrity. So she says that because she'd already made up her mind that she wanted to be in the convent, like there wasn't anything that was really going to stop her. And so St. Teresa first entered the Carmelite convent of the Incarnation. She first struggled to fully committing to life of deep spirituality. The convent had a more relaxed structure, allowing frequent visitors, and she found herself caught between her love for God and her attention for social interactions. The convent she was at was a convent for wealthy, noble women. And so it was almost like women went there as just like a safe haven to not get married, but then also like not really be in like it's almost like a monk life. They were also really busy, like working social nuns. Something happened, kind of forced into this isolation where she can finally sit in contemplation because Teresa actually becomes gravely ill and she starts suffering from these paralysis and seizures. And while she's in the convent, they don't really know what to do. Like she's not really getting better, and the doctors that they're bringing in to help her aren't really helping. And so then her dad comes and is like, we're going to take you out of the convent because I'm going to take this into my own hands. And he's like, I'm going to hire private doctors to help her. He's so desperate to help heal his daughter, and he has the money to pay all these different doctors that aren't really reliable and are kind of just like woo woo doctors, I think. And so, like, almost 3 years, she's basically bedridden, and nobody can really come see her because they don't really know what's going on with her. And so, eventually, through her isolation, she picks up this book by Francisco de Osuna, and the book is called The Third Spiritual Alphabet, like this ancient hardcore spiritual book, and like that begins to change her life. And I really liked when I read this because it just reminds me of how important it is for people to become readers and to collect good books that change the way of thinking and really help you contemplate the deeper aspects of life, because I feel like every spiritual teacher that I've read, there was like a turning point in their life, and it was usually like a book that they read that, moved them to change. And so this book, which focused on mental prayer and recollection, deeply impacted her and introduced her to the idea that God could be found within the soul through contemplation. And although she did eventually return to the convent, she continued to struggle with distractions and worldly attachments. And she says that for nearly 20 years, she practiced prayer but felt spiritually stagnant. Like, we can fall in love with the idea of the spiritual practice and like share it, but like maybe not always like living it authentically. And I feel like that's what she means, that she had this battle, is that she loved sharing with everybody about what she had learned in her book, but she wasn't like authentically living that deep contemplative spiritual life yet. And it wasn't until her late 30s, after experiencing a profound vision of Christ wounded and suffering, that she had what she considered her true conversion. And from that moment, she dedicated herself entirely to an interior life of deep prayer and mystical union with God. This transformation led her to reform the Carmelite order, founding the Discalced Carmelites, and to write her greatest spiritual works, including her Interior Castle, which she wrote in 1577. And she described the book as a vision given to her by God, using the metaphor of a castle within 7 mansions to explain the stages of the soul's journey towards the divine union, the 7 dimensions that the soul can reach, or the 7 levels of consciousness that the soul can reach while on earth and in deeply dedicated to their spiritual path. If you read The Interior Castle, it's just such an interesting book. And she talks about how every time you move through each mansion, you basically go through another spiritual awakening. Because again, it's a different level of consciousness. So something inside of you has to die for you to like move towards that deeper knowing. I find St. Teresa's story just so deeply moving. I've been reading both The Interior Castle and her autobiography at the same time, and it's been an incredible experience. I do have to admit that The Interior Castle is a difficult read. Like, it wasn't an easy read, but it's also profoundly insightful. I don't think a couple years ago I would have been able to fully grasp it because I didn't yet understand the true process of spiritual awakening. Even honestly, like 2 years ago, like I think that I had a very superficial idea of what spiritual awakening meant. And because when I went through my spiritual awakening, I didn't really have like mentors or people that were further along in the journey to help guide me from that first awakening that I had. Talks about Mansion 2. I think that I was in Mansion 2 for almost like 6 years, and there wasn't really any progression in my journey from that mansion until very recently, until I moved back to DC. And I've been able to sit in like true, like contemplative prayer and like isolation with myself. Like, I feel like I've made so much progress the last 2 years in my spiritual journey. I was also young, having a good time, that I was kind of stuck there, but I did feel a lot of that turmoil that she talks about. I would feel that all the time, where like I felt like sometimes, like if I was at a party, I didn't like how I felt there because there was a superficiality there that I couldn't explain why it made me so uncomfortable. I'm grateful that I was guided to this book after years of my own personal work, because I did get to learn about spirituality in a different way, seeking your interior life. And I got to learn about emotional intelligence, and I really was able to open my mind to learning all different kinds of ways, because now I can read The Interior Castle with more detachment from some of the language that she uses. Because if you approach this book without being in a space of learning to learn, and without the ability to compare and contrast different spiritual teaching, you might find it to be kind of intense and extreme, because St. Teresa is writing from the deep perspective of her Christian faith, and her words reflect that commitment. She was a nun from the 1600s, so you're going to find that in her speech. And if you're not grounded in just wanting to learn, then you might find it you don't want to read it anymore, or like, what is she talking about? I also want to preface that The Interior Castle was written for nuns and for people who were completely dedicated to their spiritual lives as a vocation. You know, the spiritual journey of an everyday person, someone who's in the world, working, raising a family, building relationships, is naturally going to look very different from that of a monk, a nun, or a priest, because that's literally their job. They literally are dedicated to praying and sitting in contemplation. And that doesn't mean that every spiritual person that has a job like that has reached these levels. I don't think that a lot of religious people are genuinely spiritual, because their lives are dedicated to living in deep contemplation. They're able to reach like higher levels of consciousness than someone who is juggling everyday life and their private life of contemplation when they're home. You know, it's a different routine, it's a different environment, and it's different things pulling you in different directions. Halfway through The Interior Castle, I decided to pick up her biography, and I honestly wish I would have done that first, because I find that her writing in her autobiography is much more relaxed, and it gave me a much deeper understanding of who she was as a person. And she does talk a lot about the levels of consciousness there, or the levels of prayer, but in a more relaxed way than in The Interior Castle. And she has an incredible way of correcting misconceptions about the spiritual journey, and helped me understand the inner turmoil I've felt for years as well. She also has this really beautiful way in her autobiography of keeping your ego in check and like looking for humility. And she also talks about not forcing people to be on the spiritual path, because she says that while you're beginning your spiritual journey, or while you are growing in your spiritual life, you kind of have to pretend it's just you and God for some time, because she says that in your desire for virtue, you can condemn yourself, like, which also kind of reminds me of a lot of people who force spirituality on other people. You can't really force those kinds of cliques. And she says that when you force people to live like religious life or spiritual life, you can condemn yourself, because you're no longer focused on your interior world. And you can inspire other people, but you have to be careful, because if you haven't even gotten right with yourself, then you might make somebody else go down the wrong path, or you might give them a misconception on like true spirituality, or you might make them go further away from God. I really like this quote from her book, The Book of My Life. We all feel a certain zeal for virtue. This may tempt us to judge the sins and failings of other people. The spirit of evil puts it in our minds that the distress we feel over other people's behavior stems only from a desire to protect God from being dishonored. We become so agitated by our desire to remedy the situation that we are unable to practice prayer. The greatest harm lies in our belief that the distress is a mark of our perfect virtue and a passion for God. We need to be mindful of this kind of delusion. Genuine concern for the well-being of the community does not disquiet the soul in this way. The safest path for a soul who practices prayer is to pay no attention to anyone or anything else, but to focus instead on knowing herself and pleasing God. This is vitally important. If I were to tell you about all the mistakes I have seen people make in the name of good intentions, I would never be finished talking. I really like this quote because I think that what she's pointing out is that sometimes we are so focused on how other people are living their life, how other people are practicing faith or lack of faith, that we begin to forget that our interior life is the most important. Us doing the right thing is what is important, not so much what other people are doing. In our desire for virtue, to make people live the right way, which we see that a lot in how the governments try to impose religious beliefs on people, we forget that you can't really force people into goodness or into reaching the heavens. It has to be something that comes from their heart and their daily decisions. And you teach that, in your own home when you're raising children and you're giving them values, but you can't really push that upon other people. If you want to be good, then make sure that you're being good and inspire other people with the way that you live. Saint Teresa gives such powerful guidance on what to expect as you evolve through the spiritual mansions. And she freed me from a lot of the inner conflict I've carried about wanting to be liked or loved by others. There's this quote that she has that I really, really loved where she says that I was so blinded. I used to believe that it was a virtue to be loyal to anyone who liked me. So the proper quote is actually, I was so superficial and blind in those days that I thought it was a virtue to be loyal and grateful to anyone who liked me. Damn such loyalty when it distracts a person from her loyalty to God. And the reason why I really like this quote is because I realize in my self-reflection that I used to be so desperate for connection or to have friends or to be liked that I wasn't always necessarily mindful or have the discernment if those individuals were good for my spiritual growth or putting me in a path that was good for my overall well-being. I think that now I realize what I have to seek is continue my internal life. From there, I can begin to attract people that are aligning with that growth rather than just in a place of desperation to meet or be liked or be seen because I'm looking for that outside validation of seeking value. Community is important, but you have to seek out good community and not just anybody that just likes you or gives you that right amount of attention or you have chemistry with. You really have to continuously ask God, is this person good for my life? Is this person good for my growth? That way you don't get lost in the illusions of the world and the illusions of temporary pleasures. That's why I really like this quote, and I feel like that's what she helped me get clear on. Sometimes when we are desperate for that kind of connection, we turn a blind eye when people aren't always doing right by us or when they are a bad influence. So that's what I think she means. And I feel like that quote really stuck with me. I also realize now with her is that my main goal should always be to seek my relationship with the divine. And she's helped me realign me with the direction of my spiritual path in a way that I've never been aligned with before. I related so much to her struggle, and she has helped me truly understand what it means to seek God's love above all else, and to genuinely mean it. And what I mean by that is that I feel like I used to have this superficial way of looking for God's guidance. How can you help me gain things in this earthly world? And never from like, I want to experience God's true love. Because, being in the mindset of like, I want to be connected to God because I want to gain something, because I don't want to suffer. Moving towards the mindset of like, I want to know God because I want to feel God's love. I want to love God from a place of unselfishness. I think that that's been the biggest shift. Those are very two different ways at approaching spirituality. And I think now I'm leaning more towards, I want to have a spiritual life, not because of what I could gain, but because I want to experience that unconditional love that's within me. Honestly, it's hard. I've realized just how strong the pull of worldly attachments has been for me. But through her wisdom, I've felt more confident than ever in my integrity and my ability to walk away from anything that doesn't serve my highest good, and in my commitment to staying aligned with my spiritual purpose. This is why I'm absolutely in love with St. Teresa and her teachings, and I hope all of you enjoy learning about this incredible saint as much as I have. I think that I might turn this into a part one, because the Interior Castle is just going to be just such an in-depth chat. So this episode is just going to be dedicated to St. Teresa and learning about her and why I think she's so cool and why I think you could learn from her, whether you are Christian, Catholic, or not. I think that she's just such a really great spiritual teacher. And if you're new to learning about St. Teresa, I would start off with Teresa of Avila, The Book of My Life. I think that that's a really good book about her and about her ideas on spirituality and on her ideas about meditation and the levels of consciousness. I think that's a good start. And then if you enjoy that book, I would then move on to the Interior Castle. I wish I would have done that first, because while I was reading the Interior Castle, there were moments that were really intimidating. And also because she is speaking to nuns. Again, also, she wrote this book in 1577. I'm very excited to get into the Interior Castle, so stay tuned for the next episode. And I hope you leave feeling a little more inspired. Stay tuned for my next episode on the Interior Castle. Don't forget to like this episode if you enjoyed watching or listening. It means so much to me. And please hit the subscribe and follow to get notifications on my next episode drop. And check out my website, alittlemoreinspired.com, so that you can sign up for email notifications for all of my content and posts, as well as the written post for this episode. So thank you guys. Bye.